Good evening all and welcome to tonight's video. I have a truly chilling selection of cabin stories for you to dive straight into. But before we begin, I would like to remind everyone that if you sign up over on Patreon, you get a shout out on your birthday and some really cool perks. And if you want to find out more, the link can be found in the description. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. When I was around 8 years old, I was playing with my little cousin at their parents' house during a family gathering. Behind their house is a large forest located in northeast Florida. My cousins, their neighbor, and I were playing hide and seek in the forest, and the only rule their parents had was to stay within the sight of the house. Of course, we didn't listen. I was getting bored of the game and wanted to do some exploring. I convinced the other kids to join me as we headed deeper into the forest. I noticed this ball of light floating in midair. I thought I was seeing things. I remember rubbing my eyes just to make sure it wasn't in my head, and I asked my cousins if they saw it too, and when I pointed it out, they confirmed it was there. It was bright and bobbed back and forth, changing from a yellowish color to a transparent green hue. We followed it for I can't remember how long, but we reached a small cabin and the orb disappeared. It was now dusk at this point and curiosity got the best of me. My cousins and the neighbor kid were too scared to go in, but I peeked inside the window. I saw a dim light inside through a window and what I thought was a human skull sitting on the table next to some jars. Then a shadow from within moved across the far wall, and I immediately took off behind them. We ran as fast as we could, and didn't stop until we were inside their house, and I locked the door behind us. I remember getting in trouble because our parents couldn't see us from the kitchen window, and I didn't tell my mum or anyone else what I saw because I didn't want to scare my cousins or worry my parents. I'll be frank, I'm not even sure what to think. Later that night, I woke up to the sounds of helicopters and dogs barking outside. It was well past midnight, and I asked my mum, who was standing in the kitchen with the rest of the adults that stayed over the after party, what was going on. They all had their eyes glued to whatever was happening in the backyard through the kitchen window. They said they found a body of a woman in the forest and a cabin where her killer was staying, and there was a manhunt going on. I remember not being able to sleep for the rest of the night, and the glaring white lights that shone through the folds of the blinds from the helicopters above. I'm still not sure what that orb was. Maybe it was the spirit of the woman who was trying to lead someone to her killer. I'm not even sure if one of the other kids told anyone about the cabin we saw, and if it was one of the parents that called the police. I just remember not being able to go anywhere near the tree line anymore when we visited after that night. I never wanted to go anyway. I'm 24 now. I actually forgot of this and remembered while reading something about will-o-wisps, and thought I'd share. Before I was born, my parents built a cabin in the northern White Mountains of Arizona. As a kid, we would go up there every chance we got. Summer break was spent up there, Memorial Day, etc. My parents had friends up there with kids my age, and we'd always run around the woods, hanging out and just being kids. We used to tell scary stories of an old abandoned property down the way from all our cabins, but we would never go there. You could not miss the property if you tried. Going down the dirt road to our cabin, there was this giant field on the left. Right in the middle of it was a large property that was clearly abandoned and had been for decades. It had quite a few structures on it, namely a large green 2-story barn, a red airplane hangar, and a white tractor barn. It also had a house nestled up on a hill with the only tree on the entire property. The house looked eerie with its broken windows and peeling paint. The tree was always filled with crows. As a kid, we would never dare to go in there. We would maybe venture towards the front of the property line if we were really daring. As teenagers wanting an adrenaline fix, we thought we would finally venture over there. By my sophomore year of high school, we began to go to the property routinely. We even went there at night a few times and explored the many different buildings on the property, always curious on what we would find inside. We found a bunch of odd things there, but one day I opened the drawer and gasped at what was in it. There was this old workshop building that had an old workbench, and I curiously opened the drawer, and within was a Jar Jar Binks notebook that I had when I was a kid. It was mine, as it had my childhood chicken scratch all over it and drawings I had made. My name was written within it, and so were the names of my siblings, as we used it to keep score on several games. Dumbfounded that it was within this workshop, I thumbed through it and found some handwriting I didn't recognize on the last few pages. None of my friends nor siblings knew how it got there, or whose handwriting it was at the back. In hindsight, we should have taken this as a sign to stop coming there, but we didn't. We continued going to the abandoned property to explore it and get away from our parents. By this point, we had made a top portion of the workshop into a hangout spot. We would hear floorboards creak and other scary noises, but we never let it get to us. We always thought we could take on anything that came our way. Thinking back to how I acted when I was that age, I never was scared of anything. I was always the first one to go investigate when something sounded amiss. Hell, I was the first one to suggest we go over there. Other than the weird appearance of the notebook, nothing really stopped me or any of us from going there, until the summer of my junior year in 2012. I was 16 and about to turn 17 in July, and had grown a new fondness for dirt biking and the freedom it would give me. I had started riding earlier in that year over spring break with my best friend Logan. He started me out on a little Honda 125cc, and we would ride all over the dirt roads and up in the woods. He rode a 1994 Suzuki DR200, an old Japanese enduro bike that was fully outfitted with a headlight and speedometer, and I worked my butt off to get to the point where he would comfortably let me ride it, and eventually I did. I absolutely loved having more power, a light for when it got dark, and the ability to tell how fast I was going and push it a little more every day. On this day, we had spent the majority of the day riding the bikes down our normal trails. We had finally gotten a break from all the rain, as the monsoon had come in, and it would rain just about every day. Logan and I were giddy that we had this day to romp the bikes around, and never got covered in mud or soaking wet. We'd been riding since the morning, and both decided that we would end the day over at the abandoned barn. Logan had been there plenty of times with me, and we hadn't been there in a week or so, so close to sunset. We had stopped at my parents' cabin to get some water and eat dinner quickly, hopped on our bikes, and started to make our way to the property. Being on the bigger, faster bike, I beat Logan to the property by a few minutes. I pulled into the long driveway and turned around right in front of the hangar so that I could watch Logan pull in, and we could decide what we were going to do from there. I let the bike idle, and to my left was the green workshop in front of me, and about 20 feet was this old white tractor barn. It was in bad shape. The door had fallen off years prior, and had crumbled to dust by the time we started going over there. On both sides of the barn were huge 15-foot doors for big equipment to get in and out of, and on the left of the door was a small regular-sized door for someone to go in. Since all the doors had fallen off the barn, you could see right through the large doors right to the other side. There were also 3 windows on each wall of the barn. However, you could not see on the left side of the regular-sized door, since the door was about 2 feet in from the wall. This is an important detail to help you visualize what I saw that night. As I'm sitting there in front of this white tractor barn, I'm looking out towards the driveway, which was to the left of the barn, waiting for Logan to pull up. I never felt uneasy or panicked. I just sat there patiently. At this point in time, I was pretty comfortable with being on the property alone. I'm looking out towards the driveway when I see something large move in the tractor barn from the corner of my eye. I turn my head quickly and look at the barn, and I see nothing at first. So I don't think much of it and turn back towards the driveway waiting for Logan. As I'm sitting there, I start to overthink, even though I saw something move to begin with, and I begin freaking myself out. I reassure myself surely my eyes were just playing tricks on me. My eyes had started to drift away from the road and towards the barn. I became transfixed on it. And then I saw a pale, skinny, white hand place itself on the left side of the regular door. I see this and I genuinely don't know what to make of it, but I can't move. I'm sitting on the bike completely still, watching. And then I see another hand placed below it. And before I have time to process the other hand on the frame, I see a head poke around the corner. It's looking at me. I become paralyzed with fear. My ears start to ring, and my head couldn't make sense of what was looking at me. It was an extremely pale man, with eyes darker than anything I'd ever seen in my life. It was hiding most of its body behind the wall, and was just peering around the corner looking straight to me. I began to panic, but I couldn't look away, I couldn't even move. I remember thoughts running through my mind, telling myself this couldn't be real and I was just seeing things. Then I noticed something that would confirm this was real. In its eyes were the reflections of my headlights in the dirt bike. Then I knew. There is no way this is my imagination. My heart started to beat faster, and I started to sweat. There was no way I was going to take my eyes off whatever this thing was. The only thing I can compare it to is probably Gollum from Lord of the Rings. That's the only comparison I can make of this thing. And, as it couldn't get any worse, I saw it open its mouth and smile. At this point I was too scared to think that my life was in danger. I think I hadn't felt threatened by it, more just unnerved. And I was scared looking at it because I genuinely had no idea what this thing was. Once I saw its teeth looking at me, I knew I had to get the hell out of there. I knew whatever this thing was, entity, person, animal, it wanted to do me harm. Right as I made the decision to put the bike in gear and hit the road, I heard Logan's dirt bike and saw him pull up to the driveway. I threw my bike into first gear and gunned it off the line, yelling at him to turn around and leave. Before he could even ask why, I was already past him at the end of the driveway. I looked back and saw him quickly turning the bike around and start hauling ass towards me. We got back to my cabin and I was completely panicked, sweating, panting, and just terrified. Logan pulled in right behind me, and I could see he had wide eyes and was spooked as well. When he was turning around on the side of the barn, he saw something looking at him through the side window. Before I could start to describe what it was, he beat me to it, saying he saw black beady eyes looking out at him. We both saw the same thing, and it was only confirmed that whatever was out there was real. Neither of us went back to the property again, and a few years ago it was bought, and a lot of the structures were torn down, including the old tractor barn where this thing was. I'm 25 now, and I still go up to the cabin all the time. In fact, I was there just last weekend. Sharing this story has made me relive the event all over again, and I've told this story before to my siblings and some of my friends. It never fails to make me tear up, thinking about the true terror I felt that day. Whatever I saw was real, and it haunts me to think about it. There have been weird things that have happened in our cabin, but those stories are for another day. And every time I'm alone out on the porch looking into the darkness of the pasture, I can't help but think about the thing I saw 9 years ago that will probably haunt me until the day I die. My brothers and I were 8, 7, and 4 when this happened. As such, my youngest brother, who was 4 at the time, had no recollection of this day. I was 8, and I remember most of what happened because I know I scared my nan, pops, and uncle, and parents more than I've ever seen them scared before or since. First, I need to give you some background. 4 times a year, we spend at a family cabin that we own that we call the castle. The castle sits on a man-made dam called Wyangala in New South Wales, Australia. My brothers and I always had the same rules to follow growing up. We couldn't go past the valley at the bottom of the castle or past the hill that the castle sat between. The day this happened, we broke those rules. On this trip, we had our nan and pop, mom and dad and 2 uncles. 5 a.m. on the same day in question, my brothers and I were up, dressed and playing Bob the Builder cones and ladders. Nan was complaining about us waking her up and told us to go play but be back before breakfast at 7:30. Keep in mind this was in 2004, in the middle of nowhere, Australia. The biggest danger to us were kangaroos, maybe snakes and a spider. Being the big sister, my job was to watch my little brothers and make sure we followed the rules. But for some reason this day, we thought it would be cool to walk past the valley and up the hill onto the other side and stand on top to watch the sun come over the water of the dam. I confidently decided that we could watch the sun come up and be back in time for breakfast, and if we stayed on the road that went over the valley, that could just be seen from the castle at all times if someone were to look for us. So we set off on our journey. After this, I have no idea what happened. Be it a glitch in the Matrix or a time slip or something else. Either way, we made it to the top of the hill. The sun was coming up and everything was great. We were there for no more than 10 minutes, and according to my wristwatch that I had, it must have been around 6 a.m. So we set off back down the hill. We reached the valley. We stopped to look at it for a minute. We could see the bottom clear as day, and decided as most kids we would venture down the alley. We can see the bottom clear as day, and decided as most young kids to adventure down the valley and back out the other side. We have an hour and a half to kill, and surely it wouldn't take that long. So off we went. We had to zigzag back and forth to avoid thorn bushes, loose rocks, and spinifex, a spiky and painful grass, but tried to stay as straight as possible. When we reached the bottom, I checked our time and it was roughly 6:15. We looked at the other side, and to our surprise, our Nam was sitting on the edge of the valley. She waved down at us. We thought we were going to get yelled at, but she just smiled and walked away. We thought we were in the clear. We started our way back, doing much the same as before. We were laughing and talking about whatever kids talk about when we finally made it up out the valley. Just as we walked out onto the road, Nan came screaming at us from the castle. She was demanding to know where we'd been. I looked at my brothers and back at her before pointing at the valley, too scared to speak. Nan pulled us all into a hug, and to our surprise started weeping. She started telling us we needed to get into the car so we could go find our grandfather, parents, and uncles. Apparently they were all off searching for us. We didn't say anything, just followed her. It wasn't until we were all seated in the car when we saw the time on her dashboard. It was apparently now 7 p.m, and rather than the sun rising, it was setting. I looked down at my watch and it showed the same time. I remember showing it to my 7-year-old brother, who was just as confused. February last year, our Nan passed rather unexpectedly, and at her funeral, my dad asked if we remember the day we vanished. He even joked about it, that if it were him and our uncle, he'd bet his last dollar she wouldn't have cared because we were her precious grandkids. She was beyond terrified. My youngest brother had no clue what we were talking about, but my other brother and I do remember. We told Dad what happened from our point of view. He told us that no one, not even Nan, had seen us. He told us Nan never left the castle for fear we might return, and no one would know we were there. He then filled us in on their side of the story, which we never knew. Apparently Mum had gotten up around 6:30, when she realized my brothers and I were being too quiet. She looked around the castle in our little hideouts. She even apparently called out to us with no answer. She then woke up everyone to help her search. Mum then went to the ranger station to get their help, searching while Dad started walking the hills, and Pops took the 4-wheeler drive tracks. My uncles offered to check the other cabins, the caravan parks and the boat shed. In reality, they went to get fish and chips in the caravan park, and then the next town over to get ice cream and beer, but they've since stated they knew we would turn up, so weren't worried. Nan stayed at the castle, and Mum and Dad both swear they looked in the valley and never saw us. Since last year, my brothers have been to investigate the valley, and even Dad went and had a look, and no one can figure out how we could have been hidden from sight, and even by some chance we were hidden from sight, weren't heard. Our youngest brother said that even when our other brother was down in the valley, he could hear him clear as day. Even if we did somehow end up out of sight and out of hearing range, there's no way it would have taken us all day to walk back up the other side of the valley. We've walked it plenty of times since, and it's only taken us half an hour at most. And who did we see if it wasn't Nan? Because it sure as hell looked like our Nan. This story is easily over 45 years old now, from when my mum was in summer camp and a counsellor as a teenager. Every counsellor present swears this tale is true. The following tale is long and consists of a few smaller events rather than a single encounter. To give you an idea of the setting, it was and still is a pretty normal summer camp. About 300 to 400 acres with 5 cabins, each assigned a letter A through E. Every Sunday, a new batch of campers would arrive at around 3 to 4 in the afternoon, and on Saturday they'd leave by noon. Half the summer it would have boy campers, and then on the other half they'd have girls. My mum was there for 2 weeks during the girl half. Cabins A, B and C are on top of a hill along with a small chapel, and Cabin D, which was basically used by counsellors as a meeting space, is at the bottom of a hill. It's partially built into said hill, so people could feasibly walk onto the roof from the hill, and Cabin E meanwhile is located on another hill entirely. So for the first week my mum's there aren't many kids, so they only have senior counsellors present. Most of them were in the 17 to 21 age range, and my mum would have been around 18 at the time since she was still in high school. On Thursday night, she and a few other female counsellors were hanging out in Cabin D and talking when they heard something on the roof. At first they figured it was a raccoon, but then they realized the noise was too loud. 2 of the girls decided to go outside and investigate. While they looked at the roof, 2 of the male counsellors came running down the hill. My mum actually drew the path on the diagram while explaining the story to me. I think we just saw a guy jump off the roof and run into the woods. And practically the moment they said that, they heard an unexpected sound. An engine. They look down at the access road and see a car's lights suddenly light up. Someone had parked there in the dark with all the lights off, in a spot suddenly hidden from their view due to the trees and angle of their location. On top of that, they can now see another figure running to the car and hopping into the passenger side, at which point it tore out of the spot and sped off, back towards town. So apparently there was a man stomping on the roof. This man jumped off and ran down the hill across the creek to the road where another person was in the car waiting, hidden from sight. This is obviously not normal. You know how in horror movies teens and young adults tend to joke about the obvious signs there's a monster lurking around waiting for a target? Turns out that's actually pretty accurate. Instead of getting creeped out like a rational person, my mom and the other counsellors found it more funny than anything and started joking about it. Someone threw out the name Nerd on the roof and it stuck, and it became a running joke among them, shortened it to Nor. Now, my mum's memory is a bit spotty. About the timeline of the next particular event anyway, but it most likely happened on Friday, the very next night. Remember how Cabin E is far away from the others? What I should probably say is there's a vast swath of trees that also surrounds Cabin E. It's far removed from the rest of the camp. It actually had its own telephone connecting to the main part, as this was during the 70s and cell phones didn't exist yet. Since it was so remote, they usually assigned older campers to it, but during my mum's first week, they didn't have enough campers to need it though. So my mum and 2 other female counsellors were assigned to sleep there. So on Friday, the phone rings in the middle of the night. and wakes them up. One of Mum's fellow counselors answers groggily, hello? Uh-huh. Okay. She hangs up, grabs a broom, leans it against the door handle and crawls back to bed and tries to return to the sweet land of sleep. Mum and her other counselors are confused and ask her what's going on. Then they get this sleepy response. Fred says there's someone in the woods and is heading down here with a gun. Instantly, my mum and the other girls are wide awake and go into panic mode as they recognize the potential setup for their starring scene in a real-life enactment of the plot of Friday the 13th. Meanwhile, the girl who answered the phone just tries to go back to sleep, apparently confident the broom will foil any attempt to break into the cabin. Fortunately for them, no one came bustling down the fortified door, and soon enough one of the male counselors arrived with a shotgun. He stayed over for the rest of the night, since he, like my mum and counselor too, had some doubts about the effect a broom would have at keeping out intruders. As you can probably tell, my mum now finds this particular part of the story funny, due to the lack of reaction of her friend and no survival instinct. It helps that the night passed peacefully, with no more sightings and scary events, but the next morning they found the phone line had been cut. That's a little less funny, and made them a bit more wary. But this whole night would just be more of an afterthought after the next events. Cut to the next day. As I said earlier, the campers would leave on Saturday morning, give the counselors a bit of free time until the next batch arrived on Sunday. They'd go into town Saturday afternoon to get laundry done and pick up essentials. Now, despite having 2 summer camps, this was a small town, small enough that it only published a tabloid-sized newspaper once a week on Saturday. This week, one of the counselors just happened to pick up a copy, and it was mostly forgotten until later that night when they were hanging out in the pavilion playing cards. In between turns, someone glanced at the police blotter and suddenly exclaimed, "Oh my God," then began reading out loud. Remember, the other camp I mentioned at the end of the access road? It was smaller than theirs, and instead of cabins, it placed kids in tents along with counselors. At some point that week, there was an attempted kidnapping from there, and when I say attempted, I don't mean someone tried to pick up a kid who wandered away from camp or looked like they were alone. He opened an occupied tent in the middle of the night, picked up a random kid in full view of the other campers and counselors, and took off running into the woods while carrying this random child. That is, quite possibly, the most blatant attempted kidnapping I've heard of to date. I've actually had to pause my mum here and check the kid's age, for the record 8 or 9, because the idea of a man running into the woods while carrying a child is just ludicrous. So the counselor in the tent naturally gave chase, because one does not just sit by when a random stranger opens your tent and scoops up a child. Eventually, the man had to drop the boy in order to get away, at which point the counselor stopped his pursuit to redirect his attention to the obviously traumatized child, and the kidnapper was never caught. Needless to say, all my mum's fellow counselors were freaked out by this, and outraged they hadn't been informed, since the camp was literally just up the road. The same road where they saw 2 mysterious strangers flee the night prior. Suddenly, the nerd on the roof wasn't so funny anymore. Week 2 arrives. Mum can't remember if the phone line to Cabin E got repaired in this time or not, but they had more campers this week, so a group of older girls were assigned to it as per custom. Mum and the other counselors continued to stay there too. At the end of the week on Friday nights, they would gather the kids there for what she called Indian pageant. This was the late 70s, remember. What an Indian pageant involves, I don't know, but it's irrelevant to the story. All that matters is the kids and most of the counselors would gather there that night, rounding off the week with one last hurrah before they left the next day. While this went on, someone came running to the pageant ground. Mum can't remember who it was anymore, but they grabbed her and a few other counselors and pulled them aside. Someone broke into Cabin E. Cabin E was the cabin my mum and 2 other counselors were occupying along with the older group of girls, the isolated cabin at the opposite end of camp. They took off running, and because of the distance it took them 10 minutes to get there. When they got inside, they found a scene from a horror movie. Someone had gotten into the camper's belongings and torn it all up. She described the kids' bra linings in the rafters, sleeping bags and pillows all slashed up. The clothes were cut to pieces and strewn everywhere. The cabin was a total mess. All of the camper's belongings were a write-off. But the most chilling of all, in the mirror, someone had emptied girls' toothpaste to write a simple message. The Gnaw was here. I don't think I need to explain how terrifying that was. They spent about half an hour cleaning up the cabin before the girls could return. The kids were upset to find their belongings destroyed, but were told a raccoon got inside. As far as they know, it was just a bad stroke of luck. The night passed, the campers left the next morning with no more incidents. Mum's 2 weeks were up, and she went home. She's still in close contact with a lot of her fellow counselors from that time, and they confirmed the Gnaw did in fact not return. This ends the chronicle of the Nerd on the Roof. However, there are some final points worth noting that don't fit the above. Specifically, there's a strong chance the Nerd on the Roof and the man who vandalized Cabin E are different people. The camp had a nice couple living there as caretakers, along with an adult son who was not so nice. He always gave off creepy vibes. Mom and the other counselors now suspect that he overheard them talking about the Nerd on the Roof at some point, and since they talked about him a lot, and used it as inspiration to break into the cabin as some sort of sick joke. However, since he lived on the campground, it made no sense for him to be the one who jumped off the roof and ran to a getaway car that gunned towards town. One theory I have is this. The original Nerd on the Roof was the attempted kidnapper scouting the camps in advance. The fact is, Cabin D is at the bottom of the hill, with the 3 occupied cabins that makes this even more likely. When he realized he'd been spotted, he ran off to where his partner was waiting to drive away. If true, it just adds a layer to how premeditated the attempted kidnapping was. But after having my mum retell the story to share this, I realized something which is even more disturbing. As mentioned earlier, my mother's memory of the exact timeline is a bit spotty. We placed the phone line incident on Friday because she remembers the counselors were on edge after the Nerd on the Roof sighting, but they hadn't yet seen the headline about the attempted kidnapper. Since it's been over 45 years, she doesn't remember exactly which day the attempted kidnapping at the neighboring camp occurred, only that it wasn't the same day as the Nerd on the Roof incident. In other words, there's a chance the kidnapping attempt happened on Friday night, and the other camp is in the same direction as Cabin E. I don't think I need to say more.
I live in a regional city in Australia. It's relatively big, but once you leave the center of the city, it's pretty much all bushland and trees. When I was in year 3, which makes me between 7 and 8 years old, my school took all of the year on a school camp to a campground 45 minutes out of town. It was a one-night trip, and we were all very excited. After a long day of archery, basketball, tennis, and all the other things you do on camps, we had dinner and went to bed. I distinctly remember laughing and messing around with all my friends before we fell asleep at around 11. Now, for the next part, I had forgotten for years. Until recently it came back to my mind, and now it's the clearest part of my memory. I used to be terrified of the dark, and used to wake up multiple times at night. At this certain instance, I woke up in my cabin at around 2 a.m. I remember this, as I had a watch and it was very special to me, and for some reason looking at it and checking the time always comforted me in the dark. When I woke up, I felt like something was off, not wrong, but off. I looked around my cabin and saw nothing of interest, but then I was stuck with such an intense feeling to look out the window, which was right next to my bed. Our room was on the 2nd level of this cabin complex, so when you looked out the window, you had to look down to the ground directly below you. When looking out the window, I saw nothing, and when I started to look away, something caught my eye. I could have sworn I saw something right below it, almost out of sight if you were simply looking forward. I looked down and saw someone. Not the average person, more like a tweaker, standing at around 6'4". His skin looked like he had just fallen hard on cement, He was covered in scrapes and grazes, and his hair had been buzzed off. He looked to be about 40, but could have been mid-20s, based on his super skinny build. He wore a dirty black hoodie and dark jeans that looked like motorbike pants. He also wore what looked like a mix between a fedora and a cowboy hat. When I looked down, his eyes caught mine instantly. He was staring into the window. He didn't move his head there when he saw me, no. He had been actively staring into that window before I was even there. He stared with such wide eyes, like he was straining all the muscles in his face to pop his eyes out as much as possible. The second we locked eyes, I ducked back down and hid under the covers. I wanted to scream and yell and tell my friends, but I was so scared that I couldn't even move. I waited under those covers for what felt like hours until it felt like I was safe. I slowly peeked out of the covers again and checked the window. He was still there. He had moved a bit to the right, but he was still present, staring intently at the window. I didn't even get to become fully level with the window until I ducked out of sight again and went back under the covers, whimpering. I'm not sure how, but I managed to fall asleep. When I woke up, it was light out, and all my friends were happily waking up from sleep. I woke up and checked the window again, praying he was gone, and he was. I told my friends about it in the morning and they all laughed at me for having a nightmare, and I think I believed it. I forgot about it for 10 years, but when it came back to me the other week, I realized it couldn't have been a dream. Everything was so real. I have very weird dreams, never having one that actually makes sense. My dreams always flow so strangely, so the absolute consistency is almost proof to me that this actually happened. So I specifically remember laying under my cover for ages, something I doubt would happen in a dream. I have no idea who was outside my window or what he was doing. I just hope he isn't continuing with what it was, because that look in his eyes told me that whatever he was doing there, he wasn't messing around. I don't know what I saw exactly. I just wish I had an answer. At the time of this story, I was 14. As well as being young, I had developed crippling anxiety and depression. And all I'll say is I was, and still am, very vigilant about my surroundings. On this day, I had planned to stay the night at a friend's house. I had never stayed at her place before. It was always mine. For you to understand this story, I need to explain the layout of this house. It was located on a sloped hill, and when you drove down a steep road, the first part of the house you would see was big and expansive. It looked like an old mansion. If you continued driving down, you would be met with two semi-separated buildings. Both were small and run down. And when I say small, I mean one of them was just a bedroom, and the other one was a bedroom and a small bathroom and a kitchen. No doors inside, just a piece of cloth and beads to separate the bathroom entrance from the kitchen. My friend's room was the bedroom, and her mum lived in the other section with the bathroom/kitchen. The landlord of the property lived in the main house too, the big mansion. It was located in the middle of the forest, and when I say that, I don't mean lightly. All that you could see was a massive expanse of Australian forest. These are incredibly dense, and if you tried to trek through it, you would likely receive some sort of bite, whether it be from spider, ant, or leech. I'll cut to the first thing that happened. Me and my friend had walked into her mum's flat, I can't remember why, and called out for her. She was in the bathroom, and as we walked past the small window I heard, "Yeah," coming from outside. I turned to my friend and she looked at me in the same way I was, confused. If her mum was in the bathroom, that was right in front of us, why did we hear a male voice coming from right outside? We brushed this off, as to not scare ourselves, and continued to have fun in my friend's room. For a little more context, the landlord used half of her room as storage and blocked off the back section of the room with a tall shelf and divider. There was a huge glass sliding door at the front of the room, and in the blocked-off back section there was another door. You couldn't get to that door unless you squeezed through a section outside. Now, skipping forward a little to nighttime, me and my friend had to go to the bathroom, so we slinked out of her room and walked to her mum's flat. Her mum was fast asleep. We used the bathroom as quietly as possible and then exited. As we were making the small walk back to my friend's room, we saw something out in the woods, a pair of eyes, looking directly at us from behind a tree. We panicked and froze. I pulled out my phone and took a photo before we sprinted back into her room, locking the glass door behind us and drawing the curtains. It's not a reach to say we were already freaking out. I looked at the photo, and sure enough, when I brightened the image, there was what looked to be like a man staring at us from the dark woods. We were extremely scared, but I called my mother, who was about an hour away, and she dismissed us. Sure. After that, we were still scared, but it was a little comforting. After a while, we relaxed and chalked it up to our imagination playing tricks on us. We pulled up my laptop and put on a movie. I forget which, but it was some cheesy rom-com. Maybe 20 to 30 minutes into the movie, we froze and paused it. Footsteps crunching on dry leaves outside her room. We listened in horror as the footsteps moved through the tight alley that led to the back door. We both moved slowly, standing on the bed to look over the room divider. Our eyes were locked on the back door, and after a moment of complete silence, it turned. The doorknob wiggled slowly, before it became faster. The door couldn't be opened as it was jammed against objects that were in storage. Then it stopped, no more noise. We were crying, holding each other in our arms, trying to stay as quiet as possible. Then the footsteps slowly crunched on the leaves in the opposite direction, back to the front of her room. We both hesitate now, and I reach for my phone. We call the police, and after trying to explain the situation to the operator on the other end, while in tears the whole time, she told us a unit was being dispatched and to stay where we were. Then, as we were still crying and hyperventilating, we heard a phone ring. It sounded like an old landline phone, one with the harsh and loud beeping. It was coming from the landlord's mansion. We waited silently, listening to the drawn-out ringing of his phone. After what felt like at least 2 minutes, it stopped, and we heard his voice as he talked to the operator. At this time, we both noticed another thing: fingerprints on the window. These windows were slated glass that you could open up and shift with a lever. Whoever left these prints reached up, cupped their hand around the top of the glass and dragged their fingers on the dust, as they weren't there before. Sue, the landlord, walked to her mother's unit and told her that the police called him. He seemed extremely upset and told her that he made sure they didn't send a unit. Her mother came to her room and we explained the situation. Both the landlord and her mother didn't seem to be bothered by the fact that a man just tried to enter our room. I couldn't stay the night and neither could my friend. We were too afraid to spend another minute there. I called my mum and she arrived to pick me up nearly at midnight. We dropped my friend back the next day, and when we got there, her mother told us something I don't think I can pass up as coincidence. The night it happened, it was raining, and there was a strong wind, but nothing strong enough to do this. Next to her mother's unit, she had a pole that held beads and fairy lights. During that night, right after me and my friend were picked up, it had been knocked down. Keep in mind the pole was literally embedded into the cement and tied up with other items, zip ties, so there's no way it could have just been the wind. I'm unsure of the explanation of all of this. It could have been her landlord, but I'm not too sure. It could also have been her ex-stepfather who was pretty insane. But either way, I hope to never meet the crazed man who tried to break into the room of 2 young girls. I live in North Carolina, in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. On most days, sometimes nights, it's very peaceful, but there is always a dense atmosphere in some areas. This story is back from October of 2023. I was struggling with mental issues from family life, and me and my family decided to book a cabin between Banner Elk, Beach Mountain, and Boone. I think it was called Valle Crucis, a very nice town, I hope it still is, and the cabin was a 2-story log cabin upon a very steep mountain road, and a 1-lane road, at least a mile from any building if not more. It was very nice there. We settled in and my father had to watch our neighbor's dog back in Troutman. Me and my mom and my brother and sister, both 1 year old, had arrived a day before. It was raining, and as I said, with the leaves and crisp autumn mountain air, it was serene. But it was raining nonetheless. My mum was always an outdoor person, and so was I. We settled in, relaxed, and just got the cabin ready. I helped my mum put the babies to bed and settled down on the couch for a bit. There was a deck in the back, around 8 to 9 feet tall, and a hot tub against the wall with the staircase down to the right, and the wall from the left and railing behind. Me, being impatient, asked my mum if we could go to the hot tub even though my dad wasn't there yet, and surprisingly, yet reasonably, she said no. This is reasonable as there are a lot of black bears around here a lot. The next day when my dad came here, we went into the woods behind the house and collected wood for a fire, and did other father-son cabin activities that anyone else in a cabin would do. Fast forward to the evening, we planned on going into the hot tub. We ate dinner and had a fire inside. It was too windy outside. Afterwards, we decided to go inside in the hot tub. We're all facing the back side of the staircase on the hot tub. It was nice, but you know the feeling you get when you're being watched? Yeah, me and my dad got that, but it wasn't said until later. My mum had me take a picture of her and my dad. They were both facing towards the railing, the one overlooking the forest. I snapped a few pictures, and just got a weird sense of dread. So me and my dad said, let's go inside. I sat down on the couch for a bit, and my dad went out to smoke outside on the front porch. Like normally, I thought it would be relaxing to sit out there with him, so I did. I was talking about how secluded it was, and my dad was talking about plans of where we could go hunting and fishing the next day. Then he got a message from Mum. My mum had sent the photos to her friend, and she pointed out something and sent it to Mum. My dad showed me the picture and zoomed in. It looked like a young Native American woman with a headdress in the background, indistinguishable face, but unnaturally tall. I was in shock, but nothing prepared me for what I would see and hear next. While looking at the photo, I heard loud rustling, like deer, and my dad didn't seem to notice. I looked up and saw branches, except they weren't. They were antlers, at the height of an old oak tree. I saw a literal goddamn deer skull staring at me for a few seconds, and I called my dad in a horrified, shaky voice. I heard an animal dash away and told him to get his flashlight. He began yelling at me to come inside. He turned on his large flashlight, and we heard more bolting away. We ran inside. My dad got his shotgun, saying to my mum that she's going to shoot that thing, whatever it is, with her telling him no. I was visibly shaken, having a severe panic attack for at least an hour, and we left the next day. But after, my mum and I did research and found an article about the area with an image of a Native American woman with the exact same face as the image, headdress and all. The article said something along the lines of, after a war between 2 neighboring tribes, one tribe caught a woman of another and scalped her, beheaded her, just down the valley beyond the porch. I got chills. While I was there, since I got a new pocket knife, for some reason I carved a spear, and I wasn't thinking, and brought it home, and on the way I started acting weird and seeing things. I can't remember anything, but my mum recalled me screaming, "It's coming, it's here," repeatedly. I then experienced extreme torment until February of 2024, having to be baptized, embalmed with holy water and other things. We quickly got rid of the spear. It's very clear that the land is native land, and I don't think they welcomed us. Back when I was 16, there wasn't much to do in our town. Boredom was a national sport, and it was famous for every road seeming to end in a field. It felt like every weekend bled into the next, with the lack of anything interesting to fill it with. But my friend Jack had this small cabin out on the edge of a run-down caravan site. His parents technically owned it, though they hardly ever used it, which made it the perfect spot for us. No adults, no neighbors, just a space to drink cheap booze, play Xbox, and talk crap until the early hours. We spent most of our summer out there. Sometimes we'd like to barbecue or have a little party, but mostly it was just the usual rotation of beer, bad jokes, and the comfort of knowing we were completely alone. Then came the night of Max's birthday. It was early September, when the nights were just starting to get cold. We showed up with armfuls of snacks, a speaker, and a couple of lukewarm ciders. But by 10 o'clock we were already running dry. Nathan and Tom, who were older than the rest of us, volunteered to walk to the nearest corner store to get more booze. It was a 20-minute trip each way, but none of us minded. The rest of us played in the cabin, half watching someone play FIFA, and the rest just scrolling on our phones. 45 minutes had passed when we heard the first bang on the window. It was loud, like someone had slapped their entire palm against the flat of the glass. I grinned, assuming it was Nathan and Tom screwing with us, trying to freak us out. I pulled back the curtain, ready to flip them off. But there was no one there. Still grinning though, I stuck my tongue out to the night and let the curtain fall. The front door was unlocked, they could have come in whenever they wanted. But then another bang rang through the stillness of the night. Then 3 more rapid fire, on the other side of the cabin on the back wall. Then on the glass again. Someone was circling us. Then a man's voice, deep and sharp. "Oi, oi, you in there?" It wasn't Nathan and it wasn't Tom. Jack stood up slowly, walked over to the front door. I started to say something, maybe to stop him, maybe to ask if he was sure. But words failed me and they never left my mouth. He opened the door. And this man, bald, stocky and in his mid-40s, grabbed Jack by the collar and yanked him out onto the steps. He was screaming in Jack's face, but I couldn't make out the words. There was more movement outside. Shadows kept darting past the windows, banging from every side of the cabin now. It sounded like 10 people or more were surrounding us. I remember one of them screaming again and again, "I'm gonna kill him, I'm gonna kill him." And we just stood there frozen. We didn't speak. Just 5 teenagers huddled in the corner of that crappy living room, backs pressed against the walls, staring at the door Jack had been pulled through. And the guilt, that didn't come until later. At the time, it was all panic. A thundering silence in my head drowned out every rational thought. I texted Nathan and Tom and told them not to come back, but it was already too late. They'd returned just as the men arrived and were now hiding out somewhere, maybe behind one of the caravans. Then, just like that, it stopped. The shouting, the banging, the sound of boots on dirt gone like someone had flipped a switch. We waited a full 5 minutes before daring to move. Jack and the men were gone. Eventually, we left the cabin in a kind of daze and started searching for him. We found him sitting alone at the edge of the caravan park near the river. His head in his hands, he looked so small. He didn't look injured or bleeding. We asked if he was okay. He didn't look up, just told us to get lost in no uncertain terms, and we walked back in silence. Jack never came back to school after that. Word got around that he'd had some kind of breakdown, locked himself in his room, and barely spoken to anyone, not even his parents. That was the last we ever heard of him.
We never went back to the cabin. I still don't know who those men were or what they wanted or why they came so violently and left so quietly, but I think about it often, and I wonder if Jack ever got answers. I wonder if perhaps his parents were into something shady and they'd used him, or attacked him, or threatened him to make his parents give them what they wanted. I really can't say for certain what it was all about, but it's left me wondering, and the immense guilt of leaving him there and not trying to stand up for my friend, even though I probably would have been pulverized, also plays on me. Irrational, I know, but there you go. I still feel bad for the lad, and I hope, however he is now, he's doing better than he was then.
This happened to me when I was around 11 years old, in Willow Creek, Oregon. It still gives me the creeps whenever I think about it, even though it's been over a decade. It was early December, and my stepdad Travis decided we should go on a short weekend getaway to a cabin near a lake. He thought it would be a good bonding experience for me, him, my mum, and my stepsister Marley, who was 12 at the time. My mum was all for it. No school, no phones, just nature. We left early Friday morning and got there before sunset. The place was definitely isolated. Tall trees, icy lake, and not a single neighbor in sight, as far as I could tell. The cabin was decent, not fancy but warm, and had this old stove that filled the place with the smell of burnt wood. That night, while everyone was asleep, I woke up to the sound of footsteps outside. At first, I thought perhaps it was an animal, but the steps were slow, like a crunching in the snow. I looked out the window and didn't see anything, but the sound kept coming back every 10 to 15 minutes. Eventually, I woke up Marley, and we both looked outside together. There was someone there, just barely visible in the trees. We couldn't see a face, just a silhouette. We both immediately backed away from the window and didn't sleep for the rest of the night. In the morning, I asked my mum if I could go outside with Travis while she made breakfast. Marley stayed by in the fireplace. Outside, Travis was clearing snow off the porch and talking to a man I didn't recognize. The guy was short, stocky, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, and wore a heavy camo jacket and a canvas hunting cap. The weird thing was, he was sweating a lot, even though it was freezing cold. Travis didn't seem weirded out at all. He introduced the guy as Donnie, and said he was staying in a cabin just a short walk away, and stopped to say hi. I remember asking him, "Are you alright? You look nervous." Donnie laughed awkwardly and said something like, Just some old marine nerves. Cold weather messes with me." I guess he was trying to be funny, but even at that age I remember thinking he seemed weird. Travis invited him in for breakfast. Donnie stayed for eggs and pancakes and made small talk. I was suspicious, but nothing he said set off alarms yet. After breakfast, we went back outside to play in the snow, and at one point I slipped and scraped my knee on a rock under the snow. I didn't cry, but Travis ran inside to get something. Donnie immediately knelt beside me and said, "I've got something for that in my cabin. Come with me and I'll fix you up." I wish I could have said I knew better, but I was 11 and my knee hurt, so I decided to go with him. We walked through the trees for a while. I kept expecting to see another cabin pop into view, but it was way deeper than I expected, easily a 20-minute walk. When we finally got there, the place looked like it hadn't been taken care of in years. Boarded up window, blue tarp hanging off the roof. It just felt wrong. He told me to go in first and I hesitated. The inside was cold and dark and smelled awful, and no lights were on, and there were no sounds. He got a band-aid from an old box and started patching up my knee, and he kept his hand on my leg for way too long. "You got strong legs for a kid, that's good." I wanted to leave right then, but he kept smiling and saying things like, "Why don't we hang out? I've got snacks and toys." He started asking weird questions, how much I weighed, and other things that started to creep me out. As he went over to grab something from the other room, I had seriously had enough, and I booked it out of there. I didn't know where I was going, I just ran, and I could hear him yelling not long after. I didn't stop. I was freezing, panicked, and just kept going straight, hoping it would eventually take me back to where I came from. Eventually, after about 15 minutes of running, I saw our cabin through the trees, and I ran straight into Travis crying, and I told him everything. Travis called the rental office, and the guy on the phone said there was no other cabin rented that weekend. Ours was the only active rental in the area. That afternoon, the owner called Travis back and said he sent someone to check out the cabin I described. When they found it, no one was there. That cabin didn't belong to him. It looked like someone had been living in it though. Dirty clothes, old food, camping gear, no IDs or sign of anyone. We never got any more info, and there was no police follow-up. To this day, I don't know who Donnie really was, or what he was planning to do to me. But I do know this. Everything he said was BS, and I'm lucky to get away. I hope I never see that man again. In February of this year, I went to Pigeon Forge, Tennessee with my family, and we stayed in this adorable little cabin on a golf course. My parents, Nana, aunt, and her daughter, and my brother, his girlfriend, and my dad all went out to explore the woods, riding trails, and me, my sister, and my cousin all stayed at the cabin. About 30 minutes later, they left the three of us and we were playing Cards Against Humanity, and laughing and joking about the cards we kept getting when we heard a knock at the front door. Now it's important to note that we were all sitting in the dining room. The dining room had about 8 to 10 windows around the room, one of which was pointing directly at the door. The door is angled towards the dining room. When the knock had happened, I had actually just gotten up to check on some cookies I had in the oven, so I was at that point where I couldn't see the door, but they could. My sister started staring at the door, and my cousin was looking at me with such an unexplainable expression that kind of creeped me out, but I still set my mitts down and went to walk by the door. But about halfway there, my sister called me from the back door. Mind you, I can still see my sister at the dining room table, and whatever it was called me by my legal government first name. My sister has not called me by my legal name since she was probably in 3rd grade. When that happened, I was on high alert, and realized I probably shouldn't open the door because, duh. So I went and sat down and chose to ignore it. Now, the night before, I had called my older cousin to debrief a situation with my ex. During this call, I was sitting in a metal glider on the porch where the hot tub is because it felt like I was suffocating inside. As I'm sitting there, I notice that on the golf cart bridge down from the hill, something is standing there, looking directly at me. Now at the time I chalked it up to being a man standing there because that's not unusual for me, but as I'm finishing up my conversation with my cousin, I get this overwhelming sense of dread and danger, and I can't tell where it's coming from, so I quietly got up and went inside and watched a movie. Funnily enough, after these events we went to an exotic car exhibit and aquarium. Now all was good there, nothing strange, but when we were driving through the mountains to get back to the cabin, that feeling of dread returned. It was so overwhelming I was in physical pain from how heavy my chest felt, and about 5 minutes into the unbearable pain and sense of dread driving me nuts, it stopped. It just went away. No lingering ache in my chest, no dread, nothing. My parents were looking at me like they thought I needed a hospital visit, and my brother, and his at the time girlfriend, was leaning over the back seat making sure that I was good and didn't need anything.
The whole thing was really weird and very disturbing. Can anyone help me figure out what this entity could be? Because 4 months later, I'm still going absolutely insane about it. So my girlfriend and her friends invited me to stay at a small cabin Airbnb in the Appalachian Mountains near Seven Devils. The idea was to just go up there to enjoy some snow tubing and then some light drinking, hot tub, and board games in the cabin after. So the cabin was pretty high up in the mountains, and the drive up to it was kinda scary. Single car length roads for the most part, no railings on the side of the road, and if you were on the side of the trucks, which we rented a 4-wheel drive to make the drive up, thank goodness, it was a sheer drop on that side. Sure, if we drove off the road we'd likely be stopped on some trees on the way down, but still, a bit nerve-wracking. Another thing was some of the trees on the trail had faces on them for decoration. I think they were supposed to look cute, but they looked kind of unnerving for most of us. I really should have taken pictures, but was too anxious during the climb. The cabin itself was almost at the top of the mountain and fairly small. A small living room with a very tiny and narrow kitchen and 2 bedrooms. Hot tub on the lower porch because the cabin itself was basically on the 2nd floor, so you had to go up the stairway to get to it. The keys to the cabin were in a lockbox, so no special lock option, just an old-fashioned cabin. So we came back after snow tubing and dinner. The others drank enough to get buzzed, while I only had a glass of wine since I have a condition that makes it dangerous to get too much alcohol in my system, so relatively sober. Enjoying the hot tub as planned, I witnessed a beautiful shooting star, then played board games after that, until around 1 a.m, and we all went to bed. I woke up a little after 4 a.m, because I was suddenly sweating, and then I felt kind of unsettled. I decided I need to go to the bathroom, so I got up. I left the bedroom, and nothing seemed amiss, so I used the bathroom. When I left the bathroom, the front door was wide open. Naturally, I felt immediately uneasy, but again, this was a small cabin, so there was nowhere for any intruder to hide. I could easily see the entire interior of the cabin from the tiny hallway, and I decided that maybe the last person through the door last night after the hot tub didn't fully close the door and lock it appropriately, because there's a sign by the door that says, "Close door firmly," and it was fairly windy outside. I mean, that wind was howling out there. So I go over the door and close it, making sure that it's firmly enough to the doorway to fully lock it. I even jiggle the handle a few times and try to see if it'll open when locked, but it doesn't budge. So I start to head back to the room. Then I hear the door rattle a little bit and I turn around and stare at it. I watch the lock itself turn, and then the door opens, and it doesn't slam open from the wind, it just slowly swung open. I stayed extremely still because of course that was crazy. The door has a huge clear window on it with no curtains, and a big window beside it that also doesn't have curtains, and there was absolutely no one on the other side of it. There's no way someone could have ducked out of view either and hurried away from the door after pushing it open either, because they would have had to make a lot of noise hurrying down the steps to get off the walkway. Like I said, it was an old-fashioned door as well as a simple lock and knob. No electronic buttons or anything to unlock or lock by buttons remotely. After getting the nerve to close the door again and lock it firmly, nothing else happened that night. I couldn't really go back to sleep because I was just too scared to do so. The following morning, I told the others about it, and they were pretty spooked too, but otherwise glad we were only staying that one night. Before we packed up the truck to leave, there was this strange knocking noise coming from the surrounding woods. Not like someone knocking on a wall or door. It was a deep, hollow knocking noise that only knocked twice, stopped for a while, and would then do it again. Maybe it was just trees knocking together. But after what happened early in the morning like that, it was a bit unsettling. So yeah, I'm from Florida, and though I've experienced other strange activity before, that was the most physical thing I've ever experienced. I've definitely heard plenty of stories about odd occurrences in the Appalachians, and in a way I'm glad I've experienced something, but I'll never forget the fear I felt. After all, my first instinct was an intruder, and it would have been pretty bad being up there that high by ourselves. If we had any reason to run, we could have easily fallen off a cliff or something in the pitch darkness of outside. I used to deliver packages for a shipping company in the deep south. Most days that meant long hours alone on winding gravel roads that dipped through dense woods and open hills, sometimes beautiful, other times just plain eerie. So there was this one route, just one, and I still think about it almost every time I pass anywhere near it. It was late summer last year, and I had this delivery out near the edge of the county, deeper than I'd ever been before. The GPS pointed me down a narrow gravel road, barely wide enough for my box truck. I remember the sun was low and the woods were thick, pine and oak pressing in on either side. There was only a handful of houses along the way, scattered few and far between. Eventually I reached the pinned destination. But of course there was no mailbox, no paved drive, not even a gravel turnout. Just a faint path barely wide enough for a vehicle and worn into the weeds. It looked more like a hunting trail than anything meant for deliveries. I sat there in the cab for a moment, assessing. The driveway, if you could call it that, was about 250 yards long, snaking into the forest. Trees arched overhead like a tunnel, and the land dipped unpredictably on either side. My tires crunched slowly over the packed earth as I crept forwards, barely doing anything more than a crawl. If one wheel slipped, the whole truck would slide down into some ravine I couldn't see. As I crept along, I passed an old, broken-down truck, one of those models from the 70s with the rusted-out fenders and flat tires that were so sunken into the earth it looked like the forest had grown around it. Further along, I passed not one but 4 discarded satellite dishes scattered like bones in the underbrush. That gave me pause. Who needs 4 satellite dishes out here, and why toss them out and leave them? And then finally I saw the house. It was a cabin. Well, more like a shack that had refused to collapse out of sheer stubbornness. The siding was warped, and the porch sagged in the middle. And the front door was an old wooden one with a single glass panel that was cloudy from time and grime. I parked and stepped out. Slowly, my eyes were sweeping the woods. There wasn't a sound, just the occasional insect in the wind. I approached the door and dropped the package and looked through the cloudy glass. I could make out a front room, but it appeared empty. There was nothing in there, no furniture, no decor, just 2 old metal folding chairs that were unfolded both side by side, both facing one corner of the room, but the corner was bare. There was no TV, no table, no anything, just a wall. And the 2 chairs looked like they'd been placed there deliberately. I didn't even knock. I dropped the package on the top step and turned back towards the truck. But with each step I felt pressure like I wasn't alone. Something might be trailing me just a few steps behind. I made it to the truck and slammed the door behind me, locked it, threw a quick glance in the back to make sure I was still alone. Then I remembered the path, narrow and treacherous, and backed out slowly, sweat breaking all over my neck despite the AC, and my eyes kept darting to the tree line. About 40 feet up the road, just before I turned back onto the main drag, I saw something in the road. A trash bag. Not torn open or spilled, just sitting there like it had been placed deliberately. The top was slightly twisted open, enough for me to see inside. I leaned forward, and there was a woman's sweater, neatly folded on the top, that was pale blue. I floored it. Once I got back to cell service, I called my buddy and told him everything. He urged me to return and take pictures, and against my better judgment I did. It had been only 10 to 15 minutes and the trash bag was gone. Not dragged to the side, not crumpled, gone like it had never been there. I don't know what that house was, I don't know who lived there, and I don't know what I walked into, or what nearly walked out behind me, but it didn't feel right and didn't feel safe. I told my supervisor, and he said he'd report it to the local sheriff's department and take the address off the route. But I never heard anything more. If the police went out there, maybe they found nothing. Maybe they didn't find what they were supposed to. Or maybe someone saw that I noticed too much and made sure they were ready next time. For a lot of reasons, not just the creepiness of this story, I quit a week later. Then I never want to find out what was waiting in that corner. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you enjoyed tonight's selection of cabin stories. If you did, it always helps to know down below in the comments. I certainly enjoyed reading all of these, and thank you for showing up and listening to them with me. I would like to extend a huge extra thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. If you are thinking, hey, what is this thing Mort keeps talking about? Let me tell you. It's Patreon. It's a platform where if you sign up and pledge a small amount of money every month, like $5 or something, you get access to a really cool archive of exclusive stories. We've got a hell of a lot there, and some cool extras that you don't see anywhere else, exclusive little podcasts, little interviews, and really cool other stuff. If you just want more Mort, it's all there for you. Or if you just want to help me out to help keep the channel running, it's obviously very much appreciated and would mean the world to me. But that's it from me, guys. Oh, when you get your name on screen. I'm going to wrap things up here, and I'm looking forward to seeing you tomorrow for our fat compilation before we start next week. Let me have a look to see what we have in store. We're going to start the week strong with Deep Woods, then Paranormal. This is one I don't think we've done in a long time. Funeral Home, that should be interesting. Then Alone at Night, and finishing up Friday with Truckers. And that will conclude our June content bonanza. I hope you have enjoyed it as much as I have. It's gonna end good. But for now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night.